Hi, I'm Charisse, the Sci-Fi Savage, and I'm using my degree in microbiology to look at viral attacks in science fiction and answering the question, could that really happen? Today we're looking at Star Trek Voyager, Season 3, Episode 12, Macrocosm. Let's get started.
Something just punched right through this floor panel into the jet freeze tubes.
Oh my word, that is wild. To have an organism that is strong enough to punch through the floor? Yeah, I'd be looking for the escape pod at this point. The other thing that gets me too is this kind of mucus that's around the opening. The scans show that it just has parts of proteins, amino acids, stuff like that, a little bit of DNA. But my first thought was maybe it's acidic and it actually burned a hole through the floor. But no, that's not there. This is just pure brute force from this organism. Wild.
Insect repellent was a booming business.
Again, the fact that it is strong enough to physically jostle a turbolift is disturbing. Granted, at this point in the show, we don't know what the organism is, but whatever it is, it's clearly formidable. Okay, so here a tentacle pierces through the wall of the turbolift and shoots all that goo all over Neelix's chest. Now, first of all, ew. But second of all, that is a totally legit way in which infections could spread. There are lots of viruses that spread through mucus or other kinds of bodily fluid. The difference is the infection always spreads from an infected person to another person. In this case, it's showing the organism itself is creating this goo, which could happen for some organisms, but is not likely to happen with a virus. Now, a few minutes later, we see that goo is having a very negative effect on Neelix. He's having a hard time breathing because there's fluid in his lung. He's got a high fever. He's feeling dizzy. All of those things could absolutely be symptoms of viral infection. So score 1 for science. But then a few minutes later, the organism apparently drags Neelix away, leaving behind a trail of slime. So score 1 for fiction. I am definitely getting some Slimer vibes from this bridge. Here the organism appears to sting Janeway in her arm, and she pulls out this little device which looks like maybe she's covering the area with a little bit of UV light. Now, UV light can be used to sterilize surfaces, and it works by disrupting the genetic material inside of cells, which keeps them from dividing properly. But I've never seen somebody take a UV light and kind of swipe it over a cut real quick. I don't think that'd be super effective, but it does look very cool. This sting also brings up a second point. Viruses are very particular in the way in which they infect a host. So if the virus infects people through mucus, like we saw a minute ago, it's only going to infect people through mucus. If instead it's something that's spread through the bite or sting of an insect, then it's only going to be spread through the bite or sting of an insect. I think maybe the inspiration for this scene or this idea is something like how malaria spreads through a mosquito bite. And the long kind of tongue of the mosquito acts as the syringe that pushes the parasites into the bloodstream. But that kind of a thing doesn't really make sense here, because in this case, somehow the virus itself is acting like the insect by flying around and stinging Janeway. So that's kind of like 2 points off. 1 for changing up the way the virus infects, and 2 for the fact that the virus can somehow now fly. Hey, if you want more videos just like this, be sure to like and subscribe. Now, let's get back to the show. We see the crew in the mess hall totally unconscious and they're sweating. Again, these symptoms are totally legit of viral infections. The sweating is part of the high fever, but there could also be fatigue or malaise, just a lot of tiredness while your body fights off infections. In addition, there might be symptoms like nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, queasiness, and irregular heartbeat. There are a lot of things that could happen to an infected person depending on the specific virus and how it interacts inside the body. Ooh, I hate this part. Seeing these little viruses fly out of Chakotay's neck is so disturbing. Once again, we have a virus flying, which makes no sense. But we also have this kind of termite nest that's poking out of Chakotay's neck. Now, I think this was modeled after insects that do create mounds, where they all kind of live under the mound and then they can come out through these little openings. So they're definitely playing into the theme of insects pretty hard here. Here we get our first look at kind of the final form of this macrovirus. It's so big that it's able to throw Janeway on the floor and crack a couple of her ribs. Luckily, she's able to give it a satisfying splat with her phaser rifle, but understandably, she's a little bit shaken from this experience. But never fear, the doctor is still online and is happy to tell her the backstory of everything that happened while she was on her away mission with Neelix. After getting a distress call from an infected colony, the doctor decides to go on an away mission to see if he can help.
A synthetic antigen may do the trick. However, it will have to be modified for the specific virus. I'd like to beam down to the mining colony and examine a few of the infected.
And that part is totally legit. In fact, that's exactly how vaccines are made. Antigens, which are any substance that can create an immune response, can be designed or purified in a lab setting and then injected into someone to allow them to start to build up an immune memory against that thing. So if and when they encounter that same organism out in the wild, their body is already prepared to defend against it. And in fact, the hope is that the immune system will react so quickly that the person who just got exposed won't even develop any symptoms. So in this case, creating a synthetic antigen that is customized for this virus could absolutely work as a vaccine to help protect any of the uninfected colonists from getting the infection. And we're assuming that this vaccine is going to be like 100% effective because it's the doctor and he's a genius. Later on, the doctor mentions that there are glands here that the virus is actively infecting. And that's a thing that could very well happen. And noticing that there's an infection because of swollen or inflamed glands happens every single day. You may have even experienced this yourself when you've had some kind of throat infection, and a doctor or a nurse or your mom or something will come and check underneath your chin and around your neck to see if there's anything swollen and if there's any pain or tenderness. There are glands all around there that do get swollen when there's an infection because your immune system is gearing up to fight off that infection. So the placement does make sense in terms of something happening along the throat. But for these viruses to create some kind of nest or burrow where they can start flying out of the side of your neck is madness. When the doctor encounters this termite nest thing in the alien's neck, he's amazed by how big this microscopic virus has become. A single viral particle is way smaller than a single cell, and we can't see a single cell without the help of a microscope. So the fact that the doctor can see the virus without the aid of any kind of microscope is wild. It's like billions of times bigger than it should be. And the doctor's explanation is that the virus has absorbed the growth hormone from the alien and used it to grow itself and make itself bigger. Score 1 for fiction. Growth hormone is a thing and can help organisms grow, but it does so by interacting with all the other systems in the body. In the case of a virus, viruses are very small, and even when they replicate, they stay about the same size. There's no scenario where they get bigger and bigger and bigger because they're absorbing some kind of chemical from the outside world. Now, it's also true that when a virus infects a host cell, the first thing it does is it takes over the entire cell and causes it to make more virus. So that means all the new viruses do have components from the original host. So the idea that these macroviruses are taking something from the host is not far-fetched. But the idea that that something is a chemical that the viruses themselves are using to make themselves gigantic is silly. The doctor also mentions that these viruses are attracted to infrared radiation, which is basically body heat. That's another adaptation borrowed from the insect world. Insects like mosquitoes are able to sense body heat and they're attracted to it in order to get a meal. I really like the touch that they made his hollow matrix full of infrared energy as well, so that the doctor is kind of like a walking bug zapper, but without the zap. That's kind of fun. So here Chakotay is not allowing anybody to be beamed onto the ship because this organism is not in their database, and so he's not sure if the biofilters will be able to actually filter it out. And that's really smart. If there is some kind of unknown contagion, you absolutely want to quarantine. At this stage in the game, the doctor has no idea how this infection is spread. So better safe than sorry is absolutely the way to go. Score 1 for science. Unfortunately, when the doctor beams back, he beams a few viral particles along with him. And as expected, the biofilters don't work, and a few particles escape and make their way into other systems on the ship. Here's where the science breaks down again. While it does make sense that some viruses can spread from person to person extremely quickly, it makes no sense that this virus is able to spread from the transporter buffer into the bioneural gel packs all the way in the mess hall, and then from that into B'Elanna. This contamination event is questionable. If we assume that this virus is transmitted through infected mucus that simply has to touch the skin in order to work, then this totally tracks. But we've also seen it's not super consistent how this virus infects. That being said, this is an unfortunate moment because the mess hall happens to be full of people when this contamination event happens.
The crew, why are they all in the mess hall in the cargo bays?
I believe the larger macroviruses are driven by some sort of instinct to assemble their host population.
That also makes no sense. I mean, the behavior makes no sense for a virus, but it does make sense for some animals. This reminds me of spider wasps. They will sting a spider and drag it to their lair. They'll lay their eggs inside of it, so that way when the larvae hatch, they have a fresh meal. And I am not going to show you any B-roll of that. You're welcome. So again, I think they're leaning really hard into insect behavior here, but that doesn't really have anything to do with how viruses behave. When the Doctor discovers that the infection has unfortunately made it onto Voyager, he immediately quarantines the entire deck, which again is the right call. He says it spread airborne, but we've already seen it spreads also through goo, it spreads also through being stung. So however it's getting around, we want to keep it contained to this area as much as possible. Score another one for science. Here the Doctor is telling Kes that this macrovirus uses that needle-like projection in order to inject its genetic material into a cell. And now that it's gigantic, it's going to use that same needle-like projection, but to impale its victims and inject its genetic material. This is actually legit. There are several viruses that function by injecting their genetic material into a cell. That could be DNA or RNA. And once inside of the cell, it hijacks all of the cellular machinery to make more virus. So I could totally imagine if there was a gigantic virus that it would have a gigantic syringe-style apparatus that could inject its material. And presumably that's the slime that we saw being shot at Neelix's chest earlier in the episode. However, the difference is with real viruses, once they inject that genetic material, they become kind of an empty shell. They can't do anything. They're dead, for lack of a better word. In this case, these giant viruses seem to be able to inject forever. Again, more like a wasp that can just sting and sting and sting. Watching the Doctor arm wrestle this virus and then the hypo spray just completely take it out is so entertaining and ridiculous. The Doctor says that these macroviruses are replicating at an exponential rate, and that is totally legit. I don't know how long the infection has been going on Voyager at this stage in the game, but I could totally believe that after 2 or 3 days, the entire ship could be completely overrun by viruses. And if they keep soaking up growth hormone in order to grow, and they've got a huge pile of bodies in the mess hall, they could potentially become as big as the corridors or as big as the Jeffries tubes, which is terrifying. Janeway asks the Doctor if he can disperse this antidote, this cure, in a gaseous form throughout the entire ship. And that's totally legit. If you've got something that's spread by air, usually that means droplets in the air. So when somebody talks or coughs or laughs or sneezes, little tiny particles come out of their mouth, and if those little tiny particles include viruses, it could infect somebody else who happens to walk through that cloud of particles. But also those droplets can land on surfaces, and so if somebody touches that surface and then touches their face or their eyes or has something to eat, then the infection could spread. So I do like the idea of using some kind of gas dispersal system that will just coat everything, all the surfaces inside of all of the ship. However, even once that's done, you still need to address the infected humans themselves. Otherwise, every time they talk and laugh and sneeze, the virus will continue to spread. So I would say really it's like a 2-phase approach. You need to cure the infected humans and sterilize the crap out of Voyager. Oh, these splatting blasts are so satisfying. The Tac decide to purify the vessel by completely destroying it, and that is totally legit. The one thing that we can be sure will destroy a virus is fire. Really, really hot fire. That's going to destroy almost every living thing. So here we have photon torpedoes or whatever they're shooting, which are presumably pretty hot, but we also have the vacuum of space, which is super, super cold, either of which should completely destroy the virus at the end of the day. However, it will also destroy the entire crew of Voyager. So it's not really the best option, but since the Tac have no defense against this virus, this is the only way that they can make sure that it doesn't keep spreading forever. The plan is that the Doctor is going to hypospray the entire crew and give them the cure. While on the other hand, Janeway has rigged up an antigen bomb that should take care of all the large-size viruses. Using holodeck characters to attract all the macroviruses is actually a smart move because they already established at the beginning of the episode that these viruses are attracted to infrared radiation, which is what the holograms are all made of, presumably. For some reason, Janeway also programmed them to behave the way that real people would behave if they were being attacked. Again, if these were viruses, it would make no difference. They're just infecting to infect. But if it were an animal, and specifically some kind of predator, it would respond to running and screaming with the predator-prey response. So I don't know what they were modeling for this. I don't know why the holograms had to be so terrified, but we see it's clearly very effective. But of course, just before she can throw in the bomb, a macrovirus attacks her. Then we get this epic hand-to-hand combat scene. Yeah, this part where she kills it by stabbing it in the middle is so ridiculous and hilarious and awesome. The biggest reason why this makes no sense is that if you were stabbing an animal and you hit its brain or eyes or lungs or spine or something like that, you could absolutely put it out of commission. But in the case of a virus, it doesn't have any of those things. It has no organs, it has no central nervous system, it has nothing to sever, so stabbing it would make no difference. But it looks so cool. Wow, so I guess the antigen bomb was also a real bomb. I was picturing a bug bomb where it just would have had like a gas that comes out and covers everything, and I feel like that would have been really effective towards a virus. But we've established that these macroviruses are big and they are strong. So Janeway went for concussive force instead. And I have to say, it was effective. Now, to answer the question, could that really happen? Well, this episode did have a lot of sciencey stuff in there, but it also had a lot of nonsense. The biggest being supersizing the virus and then having it take on all of these brand new behaviors for no reason. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being total fiction, 10 being total science, I have to give this episode a 2. What show should I review next? Let me know in the comments below. And then watch this video next because YouTube thinks you'll like it.